I'd just like to thank Karen for all her amazing work in putting these events together. She does an amazing job and manages to surf. One of the few people I know who can surf through the stress and look completely unfazed by it. Well, thanks for all your patience this morning. So I'm going to talk today about the Ancient Yew Tree and bring together some different threads that relate to the yew tree to demonstrate just how much the yew tree is embedded in a sense, in our culture, in our blood, in the land, and how that has been minimized and how that's become quite an invisible aspect of our culture. And really it's part of a creation mythology that we have lost and that we desperately need back. Creation mythology, and also a pathway towards the transition to death. And the yew tree stands at that crossroad, at that boundary, and as Karen talked about, it's essentially a portal. The yew tree is the ultimate portal, really, and it was used as such for thousands of years. So, first slide here, as you can see, this is the 13th rune, the yew rune. It's a tree that grows both upwards and downwards at the same time. And I'm just going to be linking some of that symbolism and some of the gesture and having you sort of feel into that gesture of something that grows upwards and downwards at the same time and how that might feel in your body. Because the ancient practices that came from the yew tree had to be embodied. These practices were embodied. And some of the experiences that happened to me were essentially a sort of rekindling of some of that information that happened to me over a long period of time where my body was altered. It was kind of altered physiology in a sense. So I spent a long time, I mean, all depth has to be interpreted, as we know. You spend a long time interpreting and deepening your experiences, which is what I've been doing over the years. So I'm going to be starting off with a little bit of personal story just to set the scene of why this could be significant to me. And then we'll be going into places as diverse as embryology, or embryological formation, some Norse mythology, and bringing some threads together. If you can't see any of these images, if they're too small, just come forward a little bit. So this is the ancient yew tree in East Lothian in Scotland. It's quite an extraordinary tree. It's reputed to be 2,000 years old, but I'm going to talk through this talk. I'm going to show you that this tree is actually probably a lot older than that even. And it sits on an estate, a private estate near Edinburgh, where there was an old lord. He's now dead, called Lord Balfour, I think his father had been the Prime Minister. I befriended him, so I was able to get to the tree quite regularly, and I asked him once what age it was, and he said,
750 years old, 750 years old. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I remember when we sacrificed, it was like a sacrifice of a bull there, and they poured all the blood under the tree. It's incredible.
So I'm thinking, wow, these old lords were up to some pagan bits and pieces. So welcome to the tree. I hope everybody can see that tree from here. Can you see it all from where you are? Good. So how did I get to that tree? It's me under there. Well, I was progressively getting ill after I left art school, and I decided that, as you know, if anybody here has been in the art colleges in the UK, they don't really gear you up, especially in the early 80s, towards going into life and having a career with it. So, I left art school, no clue whatsoever, and ended up going up to the north of Scotland to plant trees, strangely enough, to a place called Thurso. And have any of you been to Thurso? Thurso, it means actually Thor's River. That's what it actually means. And it's right in the northern the northern tip of Scotland. I don't know if you can see it very well there, to the right, top of the map. Fairly denuded place. There are no trees there. So this tree planting job was to really, just to plant these trees quickly and cut them down. And it was a very, very sort of depressing place. It was near the Dounreay nuclear reprocessing plant. And we're talking about not too long after Chernobyl, so there was a kind of intensity about being around these things. And now this has been decommissioned, but at the time it was very active. So this area was really the energetic of this area was very low energy. It was a very sort of dark energy to this place, and we were living in a caravan. A friend of mine called Ewan, interestingly, which means yew tree, and we were staying in a caravan with no light, no toilet, no heating. It was very, very barren. And one night, I woke up absolutely unable to breathe. I was kind of clutching at my throat, horrible, horrible feeling of just panic, where I couldn't actually breathe at all. I felt like I was being suffocated. And then I began to smell this kind of sulfurous kind of smell, this dark, burning, sort of brimstone-ish kind of smell. And I realized that I was actually inhaling something that wasn't air. It was more like a kind of viscous. It's like the air had been turned into this fluid, this gel almost, that I was actually breathing into my lungs. And I was bringing this into my body. And I found that I was able to actually breathe it. Of course, I was in a blind panic, writhing around in my sleeping bag, trying to get out, figuring out what was happening to me. And at that point, it's amazing when you go into an experience like that, you think you're going to die. I mean, there's absolutely no question of it. And it's amazing how quickly you accept that fact that you're very, very close to death at this point. It's amazing how quickly you become rational, and you begin to, your mind goes into a different place. You begin to actually almost be able to look at detail in a different way. So I felt, I'm dying, and it's amazing how quickly you accept that fact. So there was pitch black, and there was absolutely no orientation there, except for this crushing pressure on my body. And it felt as though that all my cells were being compressed, not just my outer body, but the inside of my body being compressed by this incredible force that seemed to be in control of the entire space, the entire space of the caravan, my body, and beyond. It was a very, very alarming situation. So I crawled from the bed and began to make my way towards the door of the caravan, because I sensed that there was something outside, and a presence outside, something intelligent, sentient, alive, moving around outside the caravan, in control of the atmosphere, in control of my cells. And there was a sense of the whole sort of atmosphere being breathed, and me being breathed along with it, like this contraction and expansion that was incredibly painful, actually. And as I got to the door of the caravan, I sort of shoved the door open and went to try and, amazingly, what was this? I wanted to know what this was. And there was a presence outside, the most powerful, unimaginably powerful presence that was just beyond anything you can imagine, just moving and circulating around this caravan, something so incredibly powerful, but not evil, just beyond these categories, something that was incredible, just breathing the entire atmosphere. And there was a sense that could have snuffed me out of existence at any point. So I wanted to try and understand what was happening. And this being stopped and was scanning my body. It was almost like it was deciding whether I was going to live or die, making a kind of decision about this. And it coiled itself back. I remember feeling the entire atmosphere coiling back, almost like a snake, into a point, like into a fulcrum or a still point at the end. And then, as though it was a serpent about to strike, and I really, at that point, thought, this is it. There's absolutely no way of coming out of this. And it curled back, went to strike, it seemed, and then there was a really loud pop, and it was gone. And the atmosphere began to change and settle back down again. And I collapsed on the floor of the caravan and was an absolute state, shaking and sobbing, and crawled back into my sleeping bag eventually, and was really very, very traumatized by this. And in the morning, nobody had any sense at all. I looked around for footprints. Of course, my mind started, that could possibly have happened. I must have dreamt it, but I looked around, there was nothing there. But my health began to deteriorate very severely at that point. So I beginning to experience kind of visions and slight out-of-body states at that point. And from there I went back to Edinburgh and tried to get on with my life. This was very difficult to do. And I was also had another encounter with a spirit in Edinburgh, the very oldest part of Edinburgh. I had another encounter with a spirit, which was really basically a shaft of light that actually struck me. And from then on, I was extremely ill. I had to be helped home that night, and my health just deteriorated. My weight began to fall off. I couldn't walk very far. There was a smell of burning in my body the entire time. So my health began to really fall to pieces, and ultimately I needed help. I wasn't able to manage my own life very well. I was taken to hospital, and many tests were taken, and everything was inconclusive, and they were completely perplexed. So I was eventually rescued by a friend who, luckily for me, just basically moved me out of my house in Edinburgh and took me to East Lothian. And one night I was she said to me, you need to go out and see people, socialise a bit. Sort of, I was in this cottage the whole time, very, very ill. So I was convinced to go out with the local tree surgeon, strangely enough. And we were down in the Red Lion's crazy pub where, there's lots of crazy things happening there. And it was a lock-in in the pub, as there usually are in the pubs in Scotland. And the end of the night, he said to me, "You've seen the yew tree before. You've seen the yew tree next to your house." And I said, "The what?" He said, "The yew tree." I had no idea even what this was. And I was an art student. I had been studying Marxist philosophy and things like that. I had a clue about this. He said, "You have to come with me." So he threw me in this truck, and off we went up this kind of windy road up towards this middle of the night, what appeared to be a bush. And I'm standing in the dark looking at this thing, and it just looks like a bush. And you can see that dark space there, and that's basically the opening. This is the entrance of this ancient yew tree. So we're going through the entrance of this great tree again. Incredible passage of essentially just of yew wood. And this is all the one tree. All right. So we can see from the Book of Lismore, 3 lifetimes of the yew for the world from its beginning to its end. So you get this sense of this tree and how old and how ancient this tree actually is. If it's in actually documented and understood even in the 15th century as being 3 lifetimes of the yew for the world from its beginning to its end. So this is an incredibly ancient tree, female tree. The yew trees are either female or male. So now going up north to Scotland, this is the Fortingal yew. Some of you have probably been to this yew tree, and it's about 52.5 feet, or at least it was, around. And you can see with the staves they have on the ground here, this is marking the original size of the tree. So the Fortingal yew was the axis mundi of Scotland at one time. This was the absolute centre of Scotland. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. Quite close to Shehallion, which is the fairy hill in Scotland. So this was the absolute centre. This tree is reputed to be 9,000 years old. It could be a lot older, in fact. And the Fortingal yew now is very little left of it, apart from this kind of these pieces of it, basically its outer shell, which are still growing really well and being quite healthy, in fact. So there's another little image of the wood. So there's the Ankerwick yew, Runnymede, which means, I think, Rune Meadow. And in 1215, the Magna Carta might have been signed there. And I think the Green Magna Carta was signed there in the 1990s under that tree. So there's a Crowhurst yew in Surrey. And this is a yew in Leeds that has actually a door on it. And I think the story goes here that there was a family of gypsies actually living in there for a while. So these trees are quite incredible. So what happened to the trees? We have so few left now, hardly any in Ireland and very few in the British Isles. We're like a sort of a museum of these trees now. They're national treasures, and of course they're still not protected. But we can see here from 18th century topiary where there was this craze back then to sort of carve these trees up. So we're going to look a little bit at what happened to the tree, what befell the yew tree, what kinds of travesties happened to this tree. So we can see here belts and chains are used. What tends to happen is the yew tree rushes to go hollow. It has a strategy of hollowing itself out. It grows up from the ground, exposes its roots, and becomes hollow. And anybody engineer is going to know that a hollow tube is stronger than a cylinder, than a thick cylinder. So the yew strategy was to hollow itself. It sends its energy out through its branches back into the ground and creates clones of itself, which come back into the ground and continue. And that first tree I showed you, the tree in East Lothian, they basically are essentially immortal. They can continue like that indefinitely if they are not tampered with. Unfortunately, the trees, as you can see, are very tampered with, and they have been for a long time, especially the ones in graveyards, where we know that these trees predated the graveyards. These were there before the graveyards. And of course, the branches are cut so that their long branches don't come down into the ground and go into mess with the corpses in the graveyards, go into their mouths and all of that sort of thing, and bring these people back from the dead, which of course would happen. So we can see here that what actually happens is the actual strategy of the natural strategy of the yew to actually come back into the ground has to be replicated artificially. So if this tree had been left alone, it would have actually just come back into the ground and created incredible strength and stability for itself, creating clones of itself and continuing to grow. But of course, these buttresses had to be put in to do what the yew would do naturally. And of course, the ultimate expression of this is the concrete-filled Tisbury yew here, which is this senselessness of filling this tree with concrete because it was deemed as being in threat or was going to die. But as we know, the yew trees will, because their strategy is to grow hollow, to become hollow. Hundreds and hundreds of years can go by, if not longer, and suddenly a little shoot might appear in the ceiling, in the cavern, the upper cavern of this tree, an aerial shoot, which will, over hundreds of years, grow down through space to connect itself back in the ground again and create a new trunk. Now, of course, to allow that to happen in the amount of time, so this is no longer practiced, this concrete filling. There's more understanding now of the yew tree. So you can see here the natural strategy of the yew is to grow back down into the ground. I actually got up into the tree here to take some of these shots. And you can see here the tree that grows upwards and downward at the same time. So it's actually rising up out of the ground, exposing its roots. Now if you turn that picture upside down, it would look the same. So you can see this incredible, this inverted tree idea beginning to show up here. Here again, this branch layering. And this is a beautiful picture here of the light on the ground. This gives you a sense of the inner cavern of the tree. So essentially, when I was basically spent 10 years under this tree here, 3 periods of 3 years where very different kinds of events took place under this tree. And the bark gives off a hallucinogenic toxin, which is quite well known now. So it's a very, very potent sentient being which contains information. There's an informational content, something. So anything that enfolds space, there's a powerful gesture to fold in on yourself, fold space. It's almost an embryonic quality to this that is containing space and separating the sacred space from the inside to the space on the outside. So crawling in through this tree was always an initiatory experience for me. And the first 3 years were incredibly painful. Lots of incredibly bad fits that I had, so seizures almost under this tree. And the second period of 3 years was more about a sense of gaining some sort of sense of working with this kind of sort of visceral quality of light that seemed to be appearing under the tree. There's tendrils of light under this tree that will come and meet you. It's quite an extraordinary experience. You can actually almost dance with this tree. It's extraordinary. It's like a kind of it's like almost like a liquid in the atmosphere that you can actually shape and move with your hands, which I've been using now a lot in my healing practice. And it's quite extraordinary work that the yew has been teaching my body over these years. Here's another picture. And this is another yew very close to the one I've just showed you, the one I spent time at. And you can see how far these branches will travel. You can see that branch there at the top, how far that will travel. And this tree is amazing because it's actually created different caverns. So you can think of the pre-Celtic peoples having these practices here with these separate caverns. So this tree here, you can go from one container, one sort of cave shape into another. And these are amazing. They're all joined. So you can move from all of these different spaces under this tree, and they're all for very specific reasons. Here's the base of that tree. Very close to Rosslyn Chapel, in fact, this one. So what happened to the trees? Where did they all go? So we're going to be looking at how prevalent they once were. Eboracum, which the Romans called York, based on an older name. It's called Yew Town, basically. It's named after a yew. So at one time there were yews all over that area, all over York. And just any cursory look at place names in the UK just gives it all away. And this is incredible. This becomes very, very significant. Something we've lost here is the amount of places that are named in this country and in Ireland and in Wales, named after the yew tree. Eboracum, York, Yew Town. Iona, which is the island of the Yew Tree place, or Yew Isle. It's incidentally, I went up there, and now, of course, there are no trees on Iona now, and I had a terrible time on Iona. I didn't find it at all a spiritual place. I felt a very denuded place and a very unhappy place, actually. Kilnaver, Church of the Yew Tree in Argyll. Killure, Church of the Yew Tree in Ireland. Yolton, Yew Wood. Yeo, river on whose banks grew yews. Yew Ridge, of course, Yew Ridge. Eford, Yew Vale. Yew Dale, Yew Valley. Ifield, Yew Field. It goes on and on. Ewhurst, Yew Wood. So there's incredible significance to the place names in the UK connected to this tree. We have Ullswater, Ullapool, Yester. There's actually a castle in East Lothian called Yester Castle, which was named after yew trees. And it has a chamber underneath it called the Goblin Hall, which is supposed to have been carved by goblins in one night. It's quite an extraordinary place if you ever get up there. Iberia, Hibernia, Iverny, the tribe from Southern Ireland. Euborodunum, the Yew Castle or Yew Fortress. So you could do your own research, and I've been doing a lot of research, and this is just part of it, that the yew tree is prevalent throughout the UK, the British Isles, in the names. So it's imprinted into the land when the yew trees no longer exist. So we're going to turn a little bit now to Norse mythology to bring some pieces together. Asgard itself is located in Yew Valley, protected by the river Ifing, which is a Yew River. And in the Voluspa, it says the Azur met, who raised on the Idavol, Yew Hill, altars and high temples. So clearly, we're talking about this incredible significance in Norse mythology. And it's certain that Yggdrasil was a yew tree. Heimdall, hallowed seed, greater and humbler sons of Heimdall, the opening of the Voluspa. And Heimdall is actually the world tree, anthropomorphized. Because Heim means world, and Dal means tree. So Heimdall actually means world tree. So we're seeing here that some deities and gods and goddesses who were originally yew trees having been personified over time. So some of our earliest encounters with the deities were with these yew trees, because they were so powerful, they were so long-lasting. Generations and generations and generations would have seen them and practiced on them, and they would have been used for initiatory rites and healing and all kinds of passages into birth and also passages into death. So Heimdall is the world tree. Now he's born of 9 mothers who are also sisters, the Vidia. And Vid means tree, but Evid could mean yew root or yew tree. So Heimdall is born from 9 yew roots or yew trees. So it gets even more dense here that Heimdall, the world tree, is born. He comes from the yew tree. And botanists will say that a couple of trees in Ireland gave birth to all the yew trees in the world. So he's also the guardian of the apple of life and death. It's given to him by Iduna. So what's the apple of life and death? Could it be the yewberry? Have any of you here tasted the yewberry? Yeah? You didn't take the seed though. We're still here. It's incredibly significant that these could have been the apples of life and death. And the whole practice was built up around the yew trees that was lost, or was it? So Iduna held the secret of regeneration. She could have been Ida, Dana, Diana. All the connections are there. The daughter of Ivaldi. And Ivaldi is Ul. It's another name for Ul, the deity ruling in yew, as he's called. So what happened to all of this? How come we don't know all of this? In fact, Mount Ida and the Cretan mountains, again, could be named after yew trees. The yew tree is a mountain tree, remember. So these trees at the tops of the mountains would have been venerated, and the mountains would have been possibly named after them. So the nine mountain mothers could actually have been originally yew trees, again, anthropomorphized. Here's a picture of Ul on his yew skis and with his yew bow. And he lived in Altoona, Euler's yew grove. So you can't really get too much clearer than this. There's incredible depth of knowledge here that's been lost about the yew tree was clearly incredibly significant. King Ida of Britain, 547 Common Era. And he lived in this place called Yvering Bell. So, place of the sacred yew tree. So we see it showing up and connected with kingship, which is a very significant connection, which we'll be looking at in a second. The Paps of Anu in Ireland. So the kind of the living landscape here, personified as the queen of the underworld, Danu. She has 3 brothers named after yew trees. Uowar, fork in the yew tree, Uanith, yew foliage, Fer-E, which is her brother, man of yew, all connected to the yew tree. Dada, the mighty, her father, also connected to the yew tree. And then we get to Fionn, the 5 sacred trees of Ireland that were planted from the yew branch. And 2 of the trees are certainly yews, but it's possible that all 5 of them were. And there's been misreadings. So Fionn means a red tree. And the salmon of knowledge is Fionn. And the word for salmon and the word for yew have a similar connection in Yeo. So I often wonder about some of you may have read about this too, with the great work of Alan Meredith, that the sort of hazelnuts of knowledge staining the salmon's belly red. Hazelnuts are not red. So this kind of offering, or this touching this practice somehow, and the salmon is very significant to the yew tree. And this whole notion of staining the belly red, hazelnuts are not going to do that. So it's possible that we're looking here at some kind of codified way of working with this, the hallucinatory quality of the yew tree, the trance qualities of the yew tree. So there's a red tree. The yew tree is the red tree. And the bark is this has not been a doctored photograph. This is taken from Fred Hagenider's book, which I'd recommend anybody who wants to look at this further. Fred Hagenider's work on the yew tree is quite incredible, and a very scholarly work, not experiential in the way that I've come to it, but a very scholarly work. And this is the red tree. So the bark is actually often red like this. It's quite extraordinary how this has significance. Yew blood. These are the yews in Wales that many of you here have probably seen. I haven't seen these yews. Who's seen the yews in Nevern? The bleeding yews. I know Karen has seen these yews. They're incredible. And they're, of course, connected with the blood of Christ often. But they just bleed like this. They emit this kind of red ooze that looks like blood. And it's really, nobody really knows much about this. It's incredible that these trees actually bleed. The Crab Ruath, the Knights of the Red Branch, 4th to 10th century protectors of the Royal House of Tara. So we're looking at this connection with kingship, with protection, the Knights of the Red Branch, the beginnings of the yew being kind of adopted or translated into sort of secret societies or sort of very exclusive kind of appropriation maybe of some of the power. Scatha, she taught Cuchulainn in a yew tree in Scotland. The arts of warfare, the arts of magic were taught to him by Scatha, the warrior in Scotland, under a yew tree, who's connected to the yew tree. And of course, the Crab Ruath were great fort builders, and this is one above the yew tree in Scotland. It's called White Castle Fort. And see if I can use the pointer here. There's the fort top there. And right here is a hill called Traprain Law. And the yew tree sits right down in that valley here between these trees and the Traprain Law, which we'll look at in a little bit, which is really like a belly, like a pregnant belly. This kind of umbilical hill, this kind of womb-like hill. And also here there's Berwick Law behind. This area in Scotland is very, very unknown in some ways, that these hills are incredibly significant, all connected with the yew tree, all aligned with the yew trees there. It's quite an extraordinary place to be. I recommend anybody travelling to go up there. Let's look at red rulership here. The Eoina, 7th to 10th century Ireland. I saw a wonder today on these ridges in the north. I beheld a yew bush on a stone, and I perceived a small oratory in front of it, and a flagstone before it. Angels were in attendance going up and down from the flagstone. Verily, said the Druid of Aid, that will be the residence of the King of Munster forever. And he who shall first kindle a fire under that yew, from him shall descend the kingship of Munster. So again, the connections of the yew with kingship. So what were these connections, and why was that so significant? So we have to look, to find out the answer to that, we have to look a wee bit into history. So the yew was decimated. And some of you probably know this story, but the demands for the longbow were so incredibly high that the yews were basically destroyed for warfare. So this tree of rejuvenation, this tree of health, this tree of life, this Yggdrasil tree, this tree which is now known as a cure for cancer, was used for war. And significant to me that whatever we project onto that tree, whatever face we see that we project onto that tree, is a face that's going to come back to us. So when the tree there was a sense of the tree for warfare. The image was warfare. The trees were destroyed, and the longbow became this terrible weapon of war. Edward I Longshanks, of course, I'm not going to give the big bee in my bonnet Scot thing, although I could. But I have to be careful where I am, right? So I'm not going to say anything about that. Anyway, Edward III, 100 Years' War. 7,000 archers at that time could fire 70,000 arrows per minute. I mean, no army could withstand this incredible colossus of the English army at this time. All, of course, because of the yew tree. By the time of Henry IV, the medieval arms trade, it was a compulsory import of the wood. They were destroying the stands of yew in British Isles. So, and it says, enter upon the lands of private individuals and cut down yew or any other wood for the public service. So it was actually sanctioned. You could actually just go into somebody's land and cut down their yew tree. So when we look at all of this, it's an absolute miracle that these yew trees that I've shown you still exist. Who was protecting these yew trees? Who was looking out for those yew trees? What power was there to prevent these last sacred trees from being destroyed? Had to have been something going on there. By the time of Henry VIII, the yew was entirely imported, and the stands of the yew in Central Europe were completely gone, exhausted, and they have not recovered since. The yew has been described as the most negatively affected European tree. But we know that the tree has incredible powers of regeneration. This is an aerial root growing down from the arch of the hollow tree. And this aerial root here in the center is hundreds upon hundreds and hundreds of years old. And this is now being left, so that eventually that will become the new trunk. So the yew trees are all about regeneration. And that's what they've always been about, regeneration. Certainly what I felt in my body in terms of my healing was being close to death and being actually transformed. This is where it gets kind of interesting, and you'll need to bear with me a little bit here because there's a very interesting story emerging here that I won't have time to tell you the real nitty-gritty of it. But these are the Roost Car Figures from Hull. Has anybody seen these figures before? No? These were found under a bed of blue clay in the River Humber from 500 BC. And they're carved in yew wood. And they're on a boat, a serpent boat. So think about that, a serpent boat. Where were they going? And they have here, you can see that they have actually a detachable penis. Why are you laughing? And actually, I did a talk in I can't remember where it was now, and somebody from the back said, "Oh, they were a lot bigger back then." I thought that was funny. It might have been somewhere in Vermont. So there were several figures found. One of them actually was after the archaeological dig in 1810 or something like that. One of the archaeologists gave one of the figures to his family, who kept it until the figures became significant. They called it the ancient doll. They had it in their house. I mean, imagine having one of these things on your mantelpiece. You know, it's kind of strange. So this is where, for me, that begins to get very interesting. The penis is detachable, and inside there is a hole, and they found fragments of crystal fragments ground up inside this kind of pubic hole, if you like. And also the Ralligan figures in Ireland, the same thing. So where was this boat going? We see here these boats. We see these ones from Sweden, where there's clearly transporting the sacred tree. Now, were these figures personifications of the sacred tree, of the rejuvenatory qualities? And I'll be showing you in a minute this whole notion of returning to origins, this idea of moving back to the origin for healing and for initiation, something that we've lost, but it's now coming back to us in ways that are unexpected. The notion of returning to the original essence, which was what the yew tree was all about, continually folding it back on itself to reinstate itself, to regrow itself, something that's incredibly rejuvenative, which was symbolized by these boats and by these figures on a journey back to the origin, back to the beginning. Not in an aggressive sense necessarily, but in more of a sort of ritual sense. And this is some of the secret of the information that comes down to us from the yew, this sense of finding the health, finding the transformation from this sense of going back to origins. We see in alchemy the prima materia, material that has not been touched by anything else, that's pure, that hasn't been damaged. So this is going back to origins to find this primal stuff. Kerouan's cauldron coming over from the island of the Blessed with this protoplasmic substance in the bottom of the boat. And the yew trees, something you should know, they're hermaphroditic. Yew trees are known to change their sexes. Yew tree in Hungary recently has been recorded in doing so. Karen and I were talking just the other day, and she was talking about two trees, yew trees, one female, one male, that have kind of combined. And this hermaphroditic sense is really crucial in this understanding of the yew. These figures essentially are hermaphroditic because the penis can be taken away. The whole idea is looking at this undifferentiated state, this moving backward to this undifferentiated state of being where sex had not been determined. This place of, we could almost say that somehow they knew. What did they know? We know it in terms of stem cells, right? This pluripotent material that can become anything. But they understood it in a different way. But embryology is not a new science. Here's a close-up of the figures. These quartzite eyes. Sometimes the left eye would be deeper than the other. So there's this Odin connection too to these figures. The Ralligan figures are much more pronounced in this difference with the eyes. And often when I was under the tree, actually, it's really strange, but the hallucinogenic toxin from the bark burns your eyes. And strangely enough, it was often my left eye that would burn. It was the strangest thing. Sometimes both, but there's a real burning sensation, sometimes on your skin too, from being under the yew. So I want to draw out some sense here of what the tree was really about, and what was lost and deliberately oppressed about these trees was the feminine quality, was the birthing nature of these trees. And my sense is that these trees were birthing chambers, as well as a lot of other things, but very, very importantly, they were birthing chambers. As we see here from Anatolia, so modern-day Turkey, from 5,000 to 7,000 BC, these birthing chambers connected to the bull, and the bull's horns, of course, being an image of fallopian tubes. So these are birthing centres from Turkey. Croghan Hill in Ireland, we can see this what does this look like? It looks like a pregnant belly, right? It's incredible. Some of these passage graves that we have were not really to do with death necessarily, to do with birth. They were probably incredibly connected to birth. Here we have Traprain Law, which is the one near the yew tree. And I had many, many experiences on top of this hill and around this hill that were very rejuvenative. And this is very much a sense of the sort of the womb-like nature of the landscape here, the tree being connected, almost like an umbilical cord to this hill. It's not very far from it, and geomantically there's a lot of alignments and stones that connect this hill up with the yew tree. There's a lifetime of research to be done here. You can think of the Newgrange. Often I think of it as a birthing chamber. Now we have to look back a little further. So figurines carved with the yew branch at the vulva. Here we see it shows up all the time in these ancient carvings. Yew branch here from 5200 BC. Again, same thing. So there's deep connections between the yew and birth. This is a really beautiful platter, 3500 BC. We can see again the yew tree connected to the vulva there. And all of these spirals, which could potentially be maybe the yew berries. And if we want any more proof of just the connections of birth and the yew tree, we just have to look at this. This is taken from Fred Hagenader, and look at the stork here. Stork, clearly a symbol of birth. The stork standing on top of the yew rune. And how much clearer can you get than that? And if you look at these images, some of them from Holland and Germany, it's very, very clear that this tree was extremely bound up with birth and rebirth. Even to the Rosetta Stone here, to the second last image, the Tree of Life image there, the Rosetta Stone, which you see in Rosslyn Chapel and places like that. And here again we see the yew rune being very connected with the tree. Oops. So this is where we go into embryology for a bit. So bear with me on this. So how does this fit into the yew tree? And why is it the embryonic tree of life? Partly because the embryo also is something that grows upwards and downwards at the same time. We think about the embryo, a human embryo, in the very early stages, the heart begins above the head. There's no head yet. So the heart begins at the top. The primordial heart space begins at the top and actually has to descend. And as it descends, the head ascends. So the heart descends, the head ascends. So we have this kind of connection. There's nobody sitting here that hasn't had their heart turned upside down. Not a single one of you. In more ways than one. We see here this image to the left of the heart having descended down from the head area. The heart is now here, where it was formerly above the head. So we have this primordial heart coming down, and there's a sense to me of this the blood connection to the yew tree. We looked at that earlier, the yew blood. Now, embryologically, we know that the blood begins on the outside. It's not dependent on the heart. The heart is not a pump. The blood begins on the outside, and it actually, when there's a movement, a switch of orientation in the womb, which creates the first midline, we have suddenly this sense of blood moving up and creating the heart. So the blood comes from the outside and brings the heart into being. The blood has its own circulation, particularly the venous blood, which I've been doing a lot of work with now, connected to the yew tree, but actually embodying. And this is the crucial thing here. You can look at this for forever, but if you don't embody the lesson of the yew tree, and I've been working with this a lot with people, it's embodying these movements of blood, embodying this outside-in quality, embodying this sense of bringing in a center, coming to the center from the outside, and this sense of space, inversion, what was inside being outside, what was outside being inside, what was up being down, what was down being up. And all of this was a practice. We're talking about something here that was a practice, a very, very evolved practice that was imprinted under the tree, which in a sense, through visions and through ritual that I saw, and things that happened to my body, there was clearly a sense of, let's call it a shamanic initiation. Shamanic initiation is being an embryological process. So for me, it's like looking at this whole notion of an initiation in a completely different way. As an essentially embryological. You can link so much of what we have in terms of shamanic initiation to embryological movements, and especially in the first 4 weeks of embryological development. It's quite incredible. So I've been bringing the two together and teaching this to groups, and it's been quite incredible results. You can see here this what the Germans call delamination, coming out of the plane. The embryo starts off as a two-dimensional being. It has to take hold of the dimensions of space. It has to fold space in on itself, similar to the yew tree, create space. So the yew tree the gestures of the yew tree were seen. The ancient people, the pre-Celtic people, really embodied the gesture of the tree itself. They didn't jump past the tree. They didn't have a vision that was something beyond the tree. It was the gestures of the tree that were important. And we'll see how this becomes important a little later. So we have this notion of the inverted tree I was talking about, and these. Let me just go back to this for a second. Not to get too complicated here, but the top left picture, this is a two-dimensional image where you were a two-dimensional being. And you can see that as you move to the right image, that yolk sac there becomes absorbed, and what was behind the amnion becomes the sort of the outside, and what was in front as a yolk sac becomes the center. So we're all used to having these incredible inversions and being turned inside out, essentially. And when you go into that yew tree, that's the experience. The experiences of being literally turned inside out. And when the experiences I had under the tree was often of being in my blood, 20 feet from my body, or being in my bone somewhere completely outside my body, but coming back into my body. There was a lot of circulatory movements. They're incredibly powerful movements, and sometimes quite painful, of being on the periphery and exchanging the periphery with a center, or bringing something from this periphery into the center. And often was my blood. So a big aspect of my initiation under the tree was blood. Extraordinary. In the flesh of the Egyptians, this soul blood. And we're not going to go into this just now because there's not time, but the Aurea Catena, the golden chain of Homer, if you look down that sequence, at some point I'll do another talk of this and relate it to embryology. This is an embryological sequence. Describes it perfectly. The formation of the midline, the formation of a center. So we had this ancient embryology that was practiced, that was embodied. We're linking this now with Karen's song. The unpronounceable, Yahweh being connected with a yew. And other people have talked about this a lot, and I know Michael Sarian has talked about this. We look at breaking down the word Yahweh, connecting that with Jehovah. Yah is one, God, or male, and Hova is female. So we can see this hermaphroditic quality coming through again. Connections with the yew rune. And with this Adam Kadmon figure, this figure that's undifferentiated. So, going from there, I want to talk a little bit about some of the actual detail. Now, this is a stone from Scotland called the Golspie stone. And this figure on the left I want to talk about a little bit, because this, what you're looking at right there, is the druid. The bird-faced druid, which shows up a lot in these old stones, and showed up all the time in my visions under the tree. And often they were very, very Egyptian. And that puzzled me for a long time. Why would it be Egyptian thematic under a tree in Scotland? Not in Egyptian in the detail that we see in the images, but more sort of raw, more pared down, but very, very unmistakably Egyptian. That's what it seemed like to me, and I could never figure this out. But I've got closer to understanding this now. But these figures here were the druids. These were the druid shamans of that area, and they always wore, or they had a bird mask or a bird face. I called them the bird shamans in the Soul Companions book. And I came across this, which I found was really fascinating, was these two bird shamans, these two bird druids, holding this head between their beaks, this whole denoting of some kind of initiatory, some kind of initiation into the mysteries, or something like that. And these bird-headed shamans led me on quite a merry dance at times, I'll tell you. We had quite a lot of information came from these bird shamans, bird druids, much of the time connected to animals, working with dissections, specific ways of working with blood and heart. And these druids had a very evolved practice that they embodied, and it was almost like the sort of yogic practice. It was incredibly, amazingly evolved practice of working with the body, of working with space, and something that was obviously very threatening, that was very, very evolved, and was used very much as a healing practice. This image from Crete here, we can see the bird figures again. Can you make those out at the bottom of the tree? These bird shamans initiating. And that tree there cannot be anything other than a yew tree. The way that it grows, the branches growing from the trunk out towards the space. So wherever you look, you see these bird shamans showing up. I love this image again from Crete, where we see the salmon and the bird above the tree of life, and then that strange little image next to the bird. It looks almost like a heart or an embryo. So I love this image from the bird shaman sort of in a trance, dancing and working with the information, this embryological information. And of course the connections with Thoth and Hermes as a great druid, the Egyptian connections with these two, and the fact that essentially I really do feel that from the experiences of the tree that there was a migration of knowledge from the British Isles into Egypt that influenced a lot of these practices. And looking at that a little bit, here's a double disc in Z-rod, which you see a lot in Scotland, and you can see how closely that resembles the yew rune. I'm not going to get into that too much just now, but there are some theories that some of you may know about this depicting, they call it the spectacles, so far from the truth, depicting a twin comet. See it here too. This is the Aberlemno stone, which is very close to where my parents live. And the Elgin stone, there's a drawing of it here. We see these people fleeing in the same direction, animals fleeing, humans fleeing, and above that there, this twin comet with the Z-rod through it. And now that bird shaman again, and the bird druid. And there's some work that analyzes this stone as basically the depiction on the exact dating of a time that a twin comet struck the northeast and basically sunk. A lot of the landmass was sunk beneath the waves. There were great tsunamis, electrical storms, and a lot of people had to migrate. And again, this could be connected to the whole Atlantis myth. But you can see that maybe this bird druid is trying to prevent this, or trying to hold back this inevitable. But this is an astrological stone, and the significance of this stone is very, very interesting. You see the sign of Hermes at the top with the three images of the ram, Aries 3 times, thrice at the top there of the image. And also the bird heads, stylized birds' heads at the very top. These two stylized birds' heads here. And then the thrice Hermes here. And this dragon, which is representing the actual comet, striking. You see the stone here again. You see the twin comet at the bottom. You see how connected we are with these bird shamans. That was the original stone that I found this carving on. Bird shamans again. You see them again here. Thoth. So it could be possible that there was a comet strike that was seen as a kind of dragon or a serpent that displaced people from the northeast. And in Scotland, a lot of the geology has never been really fully explained. Some of the strikes to certain sides of the mountains are very different from the other sides, implying that there was a strike. And the old red sandstone has layers of basalt above it that have never been explained either. So there was clearly a great cataclysm that took place in Scandinavian countries in the northeast. And even from geological surveys here, Ben More on Mull, which is supposed to have one time been a sacred site and a huge, huge mountain, may safely be computed that Mull includes the most complicated igneous centre as yet accorded detailed examination anywhere in the world. That's directly from a geological survey. Staffa, this dumping of these basilar columns, which some people have argued may be the actual nucleus of the comet that was actually dumped down into the sea in Scotland. And Shetland Isles may have been much, much larger and connected to Orkneys. So we can see that people who were facing this cataclysm would have needed to leave, and they may have even taken their trees with them. I mean, it may explain why as Ralph Ellis says, the Egyptian tree of life is the yew tree. May have explained, because it doesn't grow there, that these trees were transported. And of course we know that the yew can grow from saplings. So the yews may have been taken over and replanted in places and kept in pots, like we've seen in some of these images here, as a sacred tree. And of course that knowledge was gradually lost. So if that's the case, and what is generally understood is that the comet strike, one of many, but the northeast of Scotland actually survived the best out of all of Scotland there. And strangely enough, that's where this tree is. And that's also where the nearby tree is. So if these trees survived, which it talks about in the Voluspa, tree of life, Yggdrasil survives. It gets shaken, but it survives. If we're talking about really a literal reading of facts there, these trees could have survived the incredible catastrophe that took place. And if that's the case, these trees could be thousands upon thousands of years older than are estimated. So we could be looking at some of the most ancient beings, sentient beings on our planet. These trees, right in Scotland, right in the southeast of Scotland. And my sense is that there was much later in history, there was a sort of I'm not going to call it a secret society, but a series, a group that basically were instrumental in protecting these trees, but not wanting the knowledge to really be known about. So this is for another talk, but there's evidence that suggests that this knowledge was deliberately suppressed, and the cutting down of the trees was part of it. This kind of political reasons, but the underneath that was also this convenient excuse to destroy the trees and just to erase this great practice. But now we see that it's now beginning to come back. Strangely enough, as a cure for cancer, the trees cannot be really ignored. In the 1960s, the experiments were done. National Cancer Institute began to realize that these trees were a great cure for cancer, and tests were carried out through the bark and the needles. And now it's mostly, a lot of it's synthesized, but a lot of the Pacific yews in the northwest of the US have been lost. And now there are farms of these trees which are going to threaten the genetic diversity, because what they do is they take the sort of more pared down genetic information so that the trees can grow faster. But that's actually going to damage these older trees ultimately. So there is some danger here for these older trees. So there's a lot of threads there that I'm going to leave that I can't possibly bring together in this short period of time. But essentially, we're looking here at a tree that was at one time this incredible place of rejuvenation and initiation into the mysteries, that was connected with the body, that was something that was embodied. It was a practice that we've largely lost. But some of us are trying to work with it, and it's coming out in some interesting places. I often think of Goethe's work and the anthroposophists, and how they actually were privy to some more ancient knowledge, perhaps through Goethe's connections. That knowledge had resurfaced. So that knowledge has become available again to the West. embryology is now becoming a very important aspect in healing. And in the work that I do in biodynamic craniosacral therapy, which is connected to my shamanic work, the embryo is now the symbol of that work. It used to be the human skull, now the symbol is the embryo. So I'm doing a lot of lectures now on embryology. I'm bringing in some of this more occult information into this community of biodynamic practitioners. So it's interesting now that people are now going out and working in a healing profession and trying to embody some of this ancient knowledge in their practice. So I'm trying to build a community of this in the US, and so far we're doing pretty well with it. And one of these days I'll come back here and do some teaching. But for now, you can ask me any questions tomorrow, because I'm sure there'll be a few threads that don't make sense, but feel free to ask me tomorrow during the panel discussion. So to be continued, and thanks for your patience for all of these different aspects of the yew tree. Thank you.